I'm 81 years old, and I just walked out of church for the last time. My final tithe check is crumpled in my pocket. I stood in that empty sanctuary, and my heart wasn't beating. It was screaming, a silent riot. I went there today to finally tell Pastor Evans the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. They felt too dangerous, so I just left. The door shut behind me with a heavy thud. That sound. It made me remember everything. Let me tell you what happened. It started 60 years ago. I was 21, a new bride to Robert. I wore a pillbox hat and white gloves. After a sermon on submission, I asked Pastor James a question. My voice was sweet as honey. I said, "But where does God say a woman's own voice goes?" The silence that followed was ice cold. Robert squeezed my arm, a warning. The pastor gave me a tight little smile. He said, "Her voice finds its purpose in her husband's faith." I buried the rebellion I felt right then. I buried it deep, next to my poetry and my dreams of college. I became the perfect church wife. But a hollow space opened up inside me that day. Nothing they ever said could fill it. That hollow space lived with me for decades. Then, one Tuesday in 1994, it cracked open. I was arranging lilies by the altar. I overheard the deacons talking about Mary Ann Clark. She was a divorcee. One of them muttered, "We can't have her teaching children." They called her broken, a failure. But I knew her husband had been cruel. Her leaving was brave. To them it was a stain. My hand shook. I ruined the flowers. The God they talked about in that little circle felt so small. A God of rules, not mercy. For the first time, I wasn't just hollow. I was angry. A hot, confusing anger. I went home and scrubbed my hands raw. It didn't help. So the next week, I did something secret. I drove to the public library. I felt like a spy. I went to the philosophy aisle. I pulled down books about Buddhism, Taoism, mysticism. My hands trembled. I read about the divine inside a person. Then I found a line from an old mystic. "The kingdom of God is within you." I knew that verse. But they always said the kingdom was coming later, or was somewhere else. What if it was here, now, in me? That day I started a second life, a hidden one. That secret life grew in the dark for years. Then the phone rang. It was the golf course. Robert had a massive heart attack. He was gone. Just like that. At his funeral, the church was full of people in black. They said all the right things. God's plan, called home. Their words felt like ashes in my mouth. Where was my comfort? Where was the God of presence from my books? All I saw was a script. Everyone was acting, including me. I wore the widow's veil. But inside, that hollow space wasn't hollow anymore. It was a canyon. My grief had no home in that church. After the funeral, the house was so quiet. The kids went back to their cities. The casseroles were gone. I did something strange. I went out to the garage, to Robert's old workbench. Dust floated in the light. I wasn't looking for anything. My hand just opened a small drawer. Under some old nails, I found a notebook. It was Robert's handwriting. But it wasn't ledgers. It was poetry. Lines about the sea, about doubt, about the weight of expectation. my stoic husband. He had a hollow space too. He just hid it better. I sank to the floor. We lived 2 lives of quiet longing side by side. He never got to find his way out. That notebook was my permission slip. The next Sunday, I didn't go to church. I went to the woods by Miller's Creek. No hymns, no sermon, just quiet. I sat on a wet log. I felt silly at first. Then I just listened to the wind, the water. A thought came clear and calm. I am here. It was my own voice, but deeper, truer. In that moment, I felt a connection deeper than any altar call. I belonged to the dirt, the air, the life all around me. This wasn't rebellion. It was a homecoming. I had left a building to find a universe. But the world noticed I was gone. Pastor Evans and my daughter Sarah came to see me one Tuesday. Pastor Evans sat on my floral sofa, and my daughter Sarah was right beside him, her face all pinched with worry. "We're concerned, Sarah," he began, his voice gentle, like I was a sick child. "Grief can lead us down strange paths." Sarah reached for my hand. "Mom, please, just come back. We need our family together." Their love felt like a wall, a sincere, smothering wall. I looked at my daughter and I saw it, her fear of a mother who was suddenly unmoored. I saw the pastor's genuine care. The old me, the good wife, would have folded right then. I would have said yes, just to make the worry go away. But the woman who had sat by the creek, she held firm. My voice came out quieter than I wanted, but it was steady. "My path is my own," I told them. "I'm not lost. I'm just searching closer to home." The disappointment in that room was a physical weight. It pressed down on my shoulders after they left, and then the guilt came. It rolled in like a thick fog. Had I chosen something selfish over my own family? To find out, I knew I had to face my biggest critic, my grandson, Ben. He was 24 and in seminary, a theologian in training. I asked him to meet me for coffee at a noisy downtown place. He came armed with scripture, earnest and ready. He talked about heresy, about the danger of what he called subjective truth. I just let him talk. Then I asked him a question. "Ben," I said, "when you hold your newborn daughter, where do you feel God?" He stopped. He actually fumbled with his coffee cup. He started quoting a verse about love coming from God. "Yes," I said, "but where do you feel it? In the doctrine or right here?" I put a hand over my own heart. "In the ache in your arms?" He got quiet. So I took out Robert's poetry notebook. I showed him his grandfather's secret heart. I didn't argue theology, I just testified. I told him about the woods. His eyes softened. He didn't agree with me, not one bit. But for the first time, he saw me. Not as a straying sheep, but as a person on a pilgrimage. We hugged goodbye on the sidewalk, and it was the first real tight hug I'd gotten from family in months. I cried a little. I hadn't broken the family. I was just painfully starting to remake it. That hard-won peace didn't last long. It was tested that same winter, a brutal one. My body turned against me. I got pneumonia. At 81, that's a siege. They put me in a sterile hospital room with machines beeping. I was too weak to read, too tired for any profound thought. and the old fears rushed right back in. Was this a punishment? Had I been wrong all along? I had no energy to fight them, so I just breathed. That's all I could do. In the ragged gasp, the wheeze, the slow burning exhale, I found my prayer. No words, just the raw fact of life struggling to continue. In that stripped down state, I didn't find some booming divine presence. I found a quiet, stubborn pulse, the same pulse that was in the creek, the same one I'd felt holding my own babies years ago. It was enough. It was everything. Recovery was slow. But when I could finally walk again without getting dizzy, I knew exactly where I needed to go one last time. I drove myself to St. Michael's on a Thursday afternoon. The sun was streaming through that same stained glass, but it was beautiful again, not a cage, just a story, one story among millions. I sat in my old pew for a minute. Then I did something I never had. I walked right up the aisle, and I sat in the pastor's chair behind the big pulpit. I looked out at the empty rows. I could see the ghost of my 21-year-old self sitting there, her gloved hands folded. From up here, I finally forgave it all. The institution, the rules, my own long, long silence. It was all just part of the path. It wasn't the destination. I didn't find God in that chair. I just felt the vast, quiet space where my own authority now lived. I left without looking back, ready to speak my truth. But you know what? The world doesn't make it easy. The truth inside you is one thing. Saying it out loud to the people who matter, that's the real test. And I failed the first one. My son David called. He'd heard from Sarah. He didn't ask questions. He issued an ultimatum. Mom, you're coming for Thanksgiving, and you're coming to church with us on Sunday. This nonsense ends now. His voice was Robert's voice, that same tone of finality. That's when I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just left a building. I'd stepped out of my role. And the family script had no lines for me anymore. I went to Thanksgiving. I wore a nice dress. I smiled. I passed the mashed potatoes. My grandchildren, except for Ben, looked at me like I was a fragile vase that might tip over. My daughter-in-law, Karen, kept steering the conversation to safe topics, the weather, a new recipe. Then David raised his glass for the blessing. He prayed aloud, a beautiful traditional prayer. He ended it with, "And we pray for those among us who have lost their way, that they might find the path back to the fold." He looked right at me. Everyone did. The silence was heavy. I felt my face get hot. I just looked at my plate. I didn't say a word. I ate my turkey and it tasted like nothing. I had lost my voice all over again, right there at my son's table. After dinner, Karen cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "Sarah, we're just worried," she said, her hands deep in soapy water. "At your age, it's not safe to be questioning things. What if you fall? What if you get confused?" She meant well. They all mean well. But her worry felt like a judgment. It said my experience was just a symptom of aging, not a discovery. That hurt more than anger would have. I just nodded and dried a plate. I felt very, very old and very alone. The next morning, Sunday, I put on my hat and went to church with them. David's church was modern, all bright lights and a band. The music was loud. The pastor talked about absolute truth. He said, "Truth isn't something you feel inside. It's something revealed to you, outside of you." Each word felt like a door slamming shut on my quiet creek, on Robert's poetry, on that feeling of, I am here. I sat there, rigid in the pew, surrounded by my family. I felt like a traitor, to them and to myself. The hollow space was back, wider and darker than ever. It wasn't a quiet companion anymore. It was a chasm. After the service in the bustling lobby, David put his arm around me. "See, Mom, isn't this better? You belong here with us." He was so pleased. I looked at his face, so sure and so much like his father's, and I broke. Right there, with people milling around with coffee cups. My eyes filled with tears. I couldn't stop them. "David," I said, my voice cracking, "I feel more alone here than I ever did in my empty house." He pulled back, shocked. His face closed up. "Then you're choosing to be alone," he said, his voice low and tight. He turned and walked away to talk to the pastor. I stood there, crying in the middle of all those happy people. That was the hardest moment, the cost, my son's respect, my place at the family table, the simple, easy love I'd had before. I traded it for a feeling I couldn't even explain. I drove home that afternoon in a daze. The house was so quiet. I sat in my chair and I cried until I was empty. I thought about Robert. I wished he was there just so I could ask him if I was crazy. I wished I could read his poetry to him, ask him what the sea meant. But he was gone. And I was here, and I had burned a bridge with my son. For what? A feeling? A whisper in the woods? It seemed so stupid, so selfish. I felt utterly broken. I had no church. I had a fractured family, and all I had was this quiet inside me. And that night it felt like nothing. It felt like silence. That night, the quiet inside me felt like nothing. It felt like silence. I sat in my chair until the room went dark, and I thought that was it. I had traded my son's love for an empty feeling. But here's what I learned sitting there in the dark. That silence wasn't empty. I was just listening wrong. I was waiting for it to give me an answer about David, about being right or wrong, about fixing it. The quiet doesn't give you answers like that. It just holds you. It held me that night until I fell asleep in the chair. And when I woke up, stiff and old, the sun was coming up. The quiet was still there. It hadn't fixed a thing, but it was still there. I was wrong about so much. I was wrong to think this was a battle I had to win. I thought leaving the church was the brave part. The real bravery was sitting at David's Thanksgiving table and not saying a word. No, that's not right. The real bravery would have been speaking my truth without needing him to agree with it. I should have looked at him during that prayer and just felt love for my son, who was scared for his mother. I should have held his hand after church and said, "I see how much you love me. Thank you." Instead, I needed him to understand. I needed his blessing. That was my mistake. You don't need anyone's blessing for your own peace. You just take it. And you love them anyway, even from across a distance you can't cross. What does love require? It doesn't require you to be small so others feel big. It doesn't require you to lie so others feel safe. But it does require you to stop keeping score. Robert and we kept a quiet scorecard for 50 years. Who sacrificed more? Who buried more dreams? We both lost. Love required me to drop the scorecard. With David, I was starting a new one, his respect versus my truth. That's another losing game. Love requires you to stand where you are, firmly and gently, and let other people stand where they are, even if it breaks your heart, especially then. So here is my advice, for what it's worth, from an old woman who took too long to learn it. Don't wait for a crisis. Don't wait for the funeral, the diagnosis, the empty nest. The permission slip is in your hand right now. You are the only one who can sign it. Start small. You don't have to walk out of any building. Just be quiet for 5 minutes. Not to pray to someone out there, just listen to your own breath, to the hum in your chest. That's the universe right there. And if your family gets worried, don't get defensive. That's their love talking, even if it sounds like fear. Say, I'm just listening. You don't owe them a theology report. You don't have to explain a feeling that has no words. And for God's sake, don't do what I did and think you have to choose between your peace and your people. You can hold both, even if one hand is empty for a while. You still have time. Maybe not decades, maybe not even years, but you have now, and now is enough. This isn't about finding some magical constant bliss. It's about that stubborn pulse in the hospital bed. It's about the memory of Robert's poetry that still makes me cry. It's about the ache for my son that hasn't gone away. That's all part of the hum. The love, the loss, the quiet. It's all the same music. You don't have to be happy. You just have to be present in your own life, in your own heart. That is the sanctuary. It never closes. No one can take your name off the roll. I talk about this now because I wish someone had talked about it to me. Not in a book, but just honestly, over a cup of tea. So if this quiet confession of mine meant anything to you, do an old woman a favor. Let me know. Hit that subscribe button down there. It tells the algorithms that stories like this, quiet stories from old voices, matter. They'll show it to someone else who might need to hear it. Ring the notification bell too. I won't be posting dramatic updates, but I might share another thought if it feels right. If this sparked a memory or a question in you, leave a comment. Tell me about your own quiet moment, or just say hello. It gets lonely over here sometimes, and your words are a comfort. If you know someone, a mother, a father, a friend who's been performing a role their whole life, share this with them. Don't make a big deal of it. Just say, "This made me think of you."